Welcome to Lean Blog Interviews. I'm your host, Mark Graban. Our guest today is Kathy Miller. She is a senior operations executive, keynote speaker, certified leadership coach, and business transformation advisor with deep experience across the automotive, aerospace, and broader manufacturing sectors. During her career, she's held global VP and director roles, led operations exceeding $3 billion in scope, and had corporate responsibility for lean enterprise, quality, strategy deployment, and industrial design. She is a Shingo Prize recipient from her time in manufacturing. She's a 2021 inductee into the Women in Manufacturing Hall of Fame. She also joined us back in episode 438, discussing the book Steel Toes and Stilettos. That was co-authored with Shannon Carrolls, and it's great to have her back today. I'm also going to mention that she has a recent master's degree in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. So that's going to be part of the topics of conversation here today. So Kathy, welcome back to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm great, Mark. Thanks for having me back.
It's great to have you back. We're going to also be talking about a brand new book, a solo project, if you will. It's titled More is Better, and the more is in all caps. Might sound counterintuitive, but we're going to dig into that today. More is Better, leading operations with meaning, optimism, and relationships for excellence. So I'd love to dive, right into the new book. As an author, I always want to know the story behind the book and what motivated you to do this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I love to write, as you probably share that passion as well. It's hard to explain,
Yeah.
but we're at such an important point in our manufacturing journey. A lot of emphasis on reshoring things and a lot of technological disruptions coming our way. And we're also hearing a lot about burnout in our organizations, all organizations, manufacturing not being different from those. I thought it would be a great time to really dig into what the organizational researchers are saying and translate that into real talk and usable tools for those who lead people both on carpet and concrete, and
Yeah.
really give them some things that are proven, easy things that they can do tomorrow to really help with culture and shore up retention, motivation, all the things that we need in our manufacturing operations.
Yeah. So you mentioned researchers. Is the book kind of a combination of your experiences and passions and that recent master's degree that you did? Is that
It
part of that?
really is. Yeah, it really is. I led a lot of organizations through my, we'll just call it multiple decades, uh,
Mhm.
in and around manufacturing, big companies, all those sorts of things. And I was both a direct line leader as well as a lead by influence leader, with a lot of lean transformations, cultural transformations of operations. And my teams had very good track records. And what I found when I went back to school for my master's in applied positive psychology was that the leadership style and the tools and things that I embraced were very consistent with what research says work
Mm.
to motivate organizations and get results. So, yes, it's a combination of all those years of experience trying to help people learn lessons, not the hard way, but
Mhm.
through the ways that I learned them and the science that backs it up.
Yeah. So what is positive psychology? Is there an implication that I don't know what might be called psychology is negative?
I'd say there's traditional and positive.
Oh, fair enough. But what is meant by positive psychology?
So traditional psychology is where we're helping people who, are maybe really struggling and have some issues that they need help with to get them to neutral. And the idea of positive psychology came out a few decades ago with Dr. Marty Seligman when he was leading the American Psychological Association. And he and a number of his colleagues really had this conjecture that, if we can use research to take people from struggling to surviving, couldn't we use the same principles to take people from surviving to thriving? And so a number of people really joined that and started to study what helps individuals thrive, what helps organizations thrive. What does the research say about that, and how can we do that? We really focus on helping people live their best lives. It doesn't mean that everybody's running around, with smiley faces on all the time.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of a misnomer, but that's what positive psychology is all about.
Yeah. So it's not some sort of mindset of what some might call toxic positivity or slapping a smiley face on things.
No, it's actually a lot about authenticity.
Yeah. So that definition that you gave of trying to, level people up or raise the bar, I can't help but be reminded of, kind of like, two different types of gaps or problem statements for an organization. Are we closing a gap where we're underperforming to standard, or the type of gap or problem statement that says, well, actually, we're performing at target, but we need to raise the bar? There's a interesting parallel to what you often hear from, like, Toyota folks or in lean circles about those two different problem statements.
Right. I think that it's about really creating cultures where we can achieve excellence.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I think it applies to both, quite honestly.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, and different organizations or even different sites or different teams are going to be in one of those two situations.
Yeah, and the principles universally apply.
Yeah, so that's some good news there.
Good news.
Um, that we can learn from others and from the research, and people can learn from your new book. So I mean, I'd like to dig a little bit into, these more components as the acronym, or the all caps in the book title: meaning, optimism, and relationships. Could you kind of give us, a bit of an overview of how that breaks down and leads to excellence, maybe starting with meaning?
Absolutely. So meaning the M in my more acronym is all about helping the people in our operations feel a connection to the work, connection to each other, connection to something larger than themselves, giving them the opportunity to contribute at a level of their competence and their unique skills and abilities.
And is if you're looking within a team or within a company, that sense of meaning, like how much is that individual versus a shared sense of meaning with others?
It includes both.
Yeah.
People want to spend time in their life doing something that matters. And so you don't want to go to work every day as an individual and feel like what I'm doing could be done by anyone. It
Mhm.
doesn't contribute to anything larger than myself. So you have all those individual components. But then you have the collective component of, we couldn't really achieve these things if we didn't work together as an organization, aligned and understanding how we're making the world a better place through what we're
Mm.
contributing.
So I mean, how would a leader try to explore that with people on their team, or even with their colleagues, to try to understand, how would people articulate it? I don't know. How would you ask this? What's meaningful to you in your job, or what's your sense of meaning here at this company?
Yeah, I mean, you could have that conversation. I probably wouldn't start there. Um, Because it
Yeah.
requires a little bit of, trust and vulnerability on your
The
part.
relationships piece.
Relationships, absolutely. So, you would have that you could have that conversation through other probably less invasive questions when you start, like, "What do you
Yeah.
like about your job? What's your favorite
Yeah.
part of your job?"
Yeah.
What are the things that make you excited about coming here in the morning? And if you got to do something different, what that might be. So you're sort of just, disguising it under a little bit less heavy type
Sure.
discussions, but you can encourage it by helping people understand how what they do contributes to a bigger picture. Manufacturing's a little bit tough in that, for good reason, over the years, we've segmented it into very small pieces so
Mm.
that the work is repeatable and we can create quality things in a productive manner. So smaller chunks of work really help with that. What that caused was a disconnection between how what I'm doing here at this workstation contributes to a final product, maybe that's built at a whole different company that gets to the world. So, really helping people understand why it's important what they work on. Some products that you work on, it's very easy to understand how you're making the world a better place. Imagine
Mm.
if you were producing, the jaws of life, right? To, direct
Yeah.
people out of wrecked vehicles. And sometimes you don't. So I used to run rubber factories where people were
Mm.
producing thousands and thousands of rubber parts, different shapes and sizes. And it wasn't until I started to connect them with some of the ways they were used in the world that you felt that sense of energy
Yeah.
in the factory. But I started to bring in salespeople to tell stories about how these seals were making things better in the world. There was one story about a seal that we procured, and it actually went on a mission with special forces to get a targeted terrorist
Mhm.
in the world. And our seal was on their water pack that was used to spray his face and identify him, which is not pleasant, right? This is
Yeah.
not a pleasant story. But people all of a sudden felt that they were contributing to the security of the world.
You know?
And it just took on a different level of energy at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a great example. It's, making me reflect on, different organizations that I've worked for and worked with. I think of, like, my last manufacturing job was at, a big company that made industrial process control sensors. And, so helping a company measure the thickness of the foil that they're producing, like, not the same sort of, you know, connection to anything super meaningful. I mean, somebody use aluminum foil and could appreciate that end product, but it's different than, let's say, at Johnson and Johnson, diagnostic equipment and medical testing that helps diagnose diseases, or, when I've gone to talk, Kaizen at, biotech companies that are literally inventing new ways of curing diseases. Yeah, that meaning is powerful. But, I even think back to my time at General Motors. I'm going to say, okay, whisper, 30 years ago, and it felt many decades ago. We were in, it was a factory making engines for Cadillacs and other vehicles. But I think a lot of people there had this very personal sense of meaning of, like, I grew up loving cars. I mean, this is
Yeah.
around Detroit.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
Or, even if the job they were in wasn't a dream job, there might be that meaning of, like, I'm the third generation in my family to work for this company. And, like, I think it just goes to show that that sense of meaning can be very personal, or very different.
Yeah. For some,
Mm. Right.
absolutely. It doesn't have to be, like you say, a, life saving technology to make it meaningful. It can be meaningful to you because you're part of a community. You
Mhm.
come in and you work with people who have shared values. And it can also be, I'm sacrificing for my family. I'm coming in and doing
Mm.
this work
Mhm.
because it provides good pay and benefits. And I'm able to provide for the dreams of my spouse or my
Yeah.
children. And that's a very valid reason to find meaning as well, even if it's not, even if it is aluminum foil, which I'm sure there's amazing uses for aluminum foil. But you can find meaning in all those different places, and it's different for everyone, and that's okay. You just want to understand it. I was working with one of my clients, one of my coaching clients the other day, and she was talking about someone who came back from a year's maternity leave and the whole world had changed on her. The company reorganized, her colleagues were different, the product line was different, all these things. And she was really struggling to reacclimate. And so she sat down with her, and instead of having a performance discussion, she said, "Look, I noticed that this you don't seem to share the same level of enthusiasm you
Mhm.
did when you left. So talk to me about what's changed and what was meaningful to you before and what would be meaningful to you again." And, her employee, got very emotional about it, and they were able to come up with some modifications that allowed her to work on parts of the job that she found meaningful that had slipped away when she was gone. That may not have been the same as to another employee, but it was something that she was able to tap into that turned a situation that could have ended very negatively into something very positive. We all want to belong. We all want to matter. We all want to make a difference in the world with our unique gifts and talents. And so that's going to be different for everyone.
Yeah, and, one other thing that, I think stands out and is you write about in the book, the connection between lean and meaning, it makes me think of the late Paul O'Neill, who had been the CEO of Alcoa from like 1987 to 2001. And, as part of their culture that, they're kind of broader than, what they would have called the Alcoa production system,
Mhm.
as they were learning directly, from Toyota. But Paul O'Neill, said, as part of his just, I think, leadership and culture philosophy, that he wanted every employee to be able to say yes to three key questions every day. And the second of those questions is, and I've got the exact wording here: am I given the things I need, including education, training, tools, and encouragement, so I can make a contribution to this organization that gives meaning to my life? That he was making those connections really clear, not just contribution to the organization and the quote unquote, you might say, the value add,
Yeah,
but bringing meaning to my life, I think, is a powerful concept and goal.
it really is. And that was very astute of him, right? We spend a lot of our waking hours, it, making a living. And so how awful would it be if that was devoid of meaning all those hours?
Yeah.
So it's great that he saw that connection and encouraged that to recognize that work is a big part of our life.
Hmm.
And you want, and ultimately, our journeys around the sun are about how we spend those hours of our life, work being a part of it.
So let's move on a little bit. This is all interconnected, but
It is.
talk more about optimism. The O in
And
more.
more, right? So optimism sometimes gets a bad rap because some people think it's about that toxic positivity or, that sunny disposition, which there's nothing wrong with having a sunny disposition, but it's more about the stories that we tell ourselves when things go wrong.
Mhm.
How are we framing the situation that we're in? Dr. Marty Seligman, who's often called the father of positive psychology, really sheds a lot of light on this. And if you can see when something happens as being temporary and not pervasive, you're
Mhm.
going to be more of an optimist and be able to work towards solutions than shy away from those. And there's a lot of advantages of taking an optimistic approach to things, especially as a leader and especially in manufacturing and operations. Every day there's a plethora Yeah. of opportunities or challenges that are going to come your way. And so you want to help propagate that mindset among your team members that there's nothing that we can't solve together with the right resources, the right help. It's not just another Tuesday full of problems. It's, yep, here's our unique situation. How can we all bring the best of what we have to it and get past this and not experience the same issue again?
So I think there's an interesting phrase that comes up through your work around realistic optimism.
Mhm. Yes.
Is that kind of sounds like an important balancing word there?
It is. It is. You wanna make sure that you are grounded in the realities of your situation as you approach them. So being a lot of these principles are really targeted at sort of the middle of a spectrum, right? You don't wanna be a pessimist and you don't wanna be an unrealistic optimist because you lose credibility at that end, and at the other end, people don't love being around you if you're always the Debbie Downer in the room, right? Or the one who sucks
Mhm.
life and energy out of people.
Right. But
Negativity. Yes. But realistic
right.
optimism, and thank you for pointing that out, is about, hey, what's our current state? And how do we get to that future state with the resources that we have that's better?
I think there's an element of optimism involved in any improvement effort. If you're setting a goal or a target, you gotta be realistically optimistic that you're going to make progress toward it. Well, again, I've got Paul O'Neill on the brain here. One thing he was a very strong believer in was setting goals around zero, or he would talk about the theoretical limits of performance. So zero harm, zero defects. Some people find that inspiring, and I've heard some people grumble and say, "Well, that's not realistic." I'm curious, what were your thoughts on realistic optimism and goals of, zero harm or 100% on time delivery if we're falling short?
Mhm.
How do we stay optimistic, or how do we find a good balance there?
Yeah, I think for crossing over here into goal setting theory and how how far you want to make your stretch goals. So I think that we need to be optimistic that we can always make things better. And I think that it's okay to have goals that approach perfection, but understanding the reality of the situation. So I grew up, with the UAW, and so very early on, we were taught that all accidents are preventable.
Yeah.
And so I really had to embrace that, zero harm mentality to
Mhm.
continue to drive. And I would have periods in my plants, like maybe a year without a recordable incident or something like that. And I do believe that there could be a world like that. But in the meantime, we got to deal with the reality of wiping out the risks that currently exist while we're not in a perfect situation. You want to, I think it's okay to, want to believe that everybody should come to work and leave with the same amount of digits.
Right.
If,
Right.
if you don't believe that, if you believe like, oh yeah, it's okay to have one fatality a year, how do you get up in the morning and do the right things? So I
Yeah.
think it's a combination of
Yeah.
your beliefs, your values, and keeping it real, moving in the right direction.
Yeah. So there's, I mean, I think a connection between one powerful sense of meaning could be the meaning, the importance of people going home in one piece,
Mhm.
being safe, not being psychologically crushed
Yeah.
by the workplace either.
Yeah.
Going home as good, if not better,
Mhm.
than you were. And I think sense of meaning and tapping into that helps people feel better psychologically. But so that meaning could be, whether someone's in a formal safety role, or I would hope if someone's in a executive leadership role, like Paul O'Neill, that was his part of his meaning,
Sure.
not something to delegate.
Yes.
But I think maybe part of the realistic optimism, comes back to a Dr. Deming question of, okay, by what method, right? It's not just enough. It's not enough to just preach zero, but what are we doing to work toward it? That
Mhm.
makes, I guess, some of the achievement more realistic. And if we're working toward it and not punishing a perceived lack of progress, of like,
Yes.
I think, how are we helping people? And if we say the goal is zero and we're punishing people for non-zero outcomes, they might start hiding them.
Correct. Correct. It's really important to create a culture of psychological safety where people feel comfortable asking questions, challenging the status quo, and bringing up risks. If we,
Yeah, so we can work on it.
yeah, so we can work on it. I've been in both situations where I've worked for companies who ask five whys, not the five whos. And
Yeah.
worked in companies where, you had to know the social security number of the person who,
Mhm.
couldn't lock out the equipment, right? So you got to look at those types of risks as systemic. What are we
Mhm.
failing to do as an organization to prevent these situations? And eh, accountability doesn't just disappear in those situations. But if you're supporting people with the resources that they need, the knowledge that they need, the equipment that they need, and they choose to just continually disregard it, there's still an element of accountability that can be there, but I don't think that's really propagating a fear-based culture.
Right.
A fear-based culture is, I didn't know this was harmful, and I got sent home for 4 days because of it
Mhm.
or whatever. So we psychological safety is a big deal.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's the foundation for engagement and improvement, let alone excellence.
It is. And I always try to encourage people because there's always variation in different organizations among leaders, and companies have their values and mission statements and behaviors that they espouse, but people implement those at different levels. And so I always encourage people, if you're in a situation where you don't feel psychologically safe, please be a buffer for your team and not an amplifier.
So let's talk about relationships. The role that, uh, how do you define, maybe let me ask a different question. Define what we would work on as leaders or with our colleagues. This, I'm sure, goes deeper than, there's the one employee engagement question. Do you have a best friend in the workplace?
It's the most controversial employee engagement
Yeah.
survey question in the world. Yeah. Yeah. Relationships, like meaning, like optimism, have many dimensions. They start with this very basic concept of high quality connections. And that is those small moments in time where two people interact and both leave feeling seen and heard, and positive energy is created.
Mm.
And those can happen regardless of length of relationship or status on an org chart. And they've been studied by the University of Michigan, Dr. Jane Dutton, University of North Carolina, Dr. Barbara Fredrickson, as actual phenomenon. So that's one really great place to start. When we're leaders and leaders of large organizations, at times there's not space for you to have a deep personal relationship with 8,000 people, right? It's just not practical. But what you can do is you can learn as many names as possible. You can smile at people. You can look at them in the eye. You can stop and respectfully remind them that you care about them. So they need to put on their safety glasses,
Yeah.
right? There's all kinds of these little moments that build positive reservoirs of energy, like a positive emotional bank that you can draw on when things get bad. So that's where and more is better. I start with relationships and just recognizing that these micro moments have a lot of value in an organization. But then there's other concepts that you need to look at, such as compassion. And compassion doesn't necessarily mean you're soft or you
Mm,
look the other way
mhm.
when people are making bad decisions, but that you understand that people are human and you need to give them the training, the resources, the support to be successful. So I like compassion with accountability. There's different relationships between leaders and their teammates and peers. And
Yeah.
how do those different roles help support a healthy place where people feel supported? And I think that's the issue about, do you have a best friend at work? Uh, My best friend doesn't never worked with me, but I did have a lot of people that I could count on when the chips were bad. I
Yeah.
remember
Oh,
this one time when I was in operations and I had come from engineering and a lot of people didn't know me. And
mhm,
and I was a manufacturing superintendent and um, I got yelled at, like literally yelled at.
mhm.
You know, my husband was like, "What? Did they say something you didn't like or did you get yelled at?" I'm like, "No, my boss raised his voice
Yes.
at me in the conference room, you know?" And I was just devastated by it because
Mm,
my mantra is always to be a high value, low maintenance employee.
mm,
And I was
mm,
kind of getting on the bandwagon with some of my peers about some resource reallocation. And I happened to be the last person to speak, and my boss just, slammed the table and expletive and blah, blah, blah. So I was a
mm.
little devastated. And, I went back to my office and kind of holding my head down in shame and all that sort of thing. And about an hour later, one of my peers, who I didn't know very well, he wasn't even in my department, he was in a different part of the organization, came in and said, "Hey, I just came to check on you." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm fine." And he's like, "You've never been yelled at before at work, have you?" I said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "Well, it's a good thing." And I said, "How so?" And he's like, "Because now you're just like one of the rest of us. You're not, somebody that was planted in here who's, rotating through to get an experience on their way to bigger and better things. Now you're one of the teams." So, I always remembered that he acted like a best friend, even though I didn't know him that well. And that was
Yeah.
a huge moment in terms of
Mhm.
relationship and support at work. And, I went to another organization where there was a boss who, it seemed like every time we went to staff meeting, he picked one person who was going to be the target.
Oh,
And, when it was my turn, I kept waiting for my peers to come in and be like, "It's okay, kiddo." And that never happened. And that was very lonely.
mm,
So even though I was surrounded by a lot of people, I had a lot of responsibility, a lot of direct reports. That was very lonely for me in that
yeah.
organization because I didn't feel like I had a best friend at work.
Yeah.
So
And that was early days. When you're saying kiddo, was that like
no, this was like
what?
5 years ago, Mark. I'm
You-
yeah. No, I just like to be optimistic about, the number of years I've spent on
Yeah.
Earth and in manufacturing operations. I just
Yeah.
meant that more as like a term of endearment. That was
Yeah.
not early on, actually.
Okay. Because I mean, I'm having flashbacks to my time with General Motors right out of college. There was a lot of yelling. I
Yeah.
mean, well, I don't think it was. I can't remember a time where it was ever directed at me
Mm.
personally, but there was a lot of
It was there
collective
in the environment.
being yelled at as part of a group.
Yeah.
And the thing I think it reinforced with me early on was like, this isn't something I want to learn to do. This isn't something I want to emulate. And it wasn't even just the raising of voices, but just belittling, blaming, insulting
Yeah.
things that were being said.
Yes. I give a lot of keynote speeches and a lot of to a lot of women's groups. And when I
Mhm.
talk about some of the early days, like you're talking about, some of the younger generations in the crowd get very upset. And why did you put up with that? Why did you stay there? That's just how it was. And you had to sort of survive that. What I always tell them is I had to survive that so that I could get to a point where I could influence that and make it
Mhm.
better and different. Running away from it wouldn't have really changed anything, but I never fell into that behavior. It's
Yeah.
it's not psychologically safe, and quite honestly, it's not right to treat people that way.
Right. I ran away from it. I don't regret that, but I'll try to help change other places.
You're doing your work now to help fix it, so that's all good. It's not as prevalent, but it's still out there.
There's sadly, I mean, healthcare
Mm.
surprised me that that tends to exist more, I get in healthcare settings. And there's a similar question that could be asked of like, well, why do you put up with that? But, if people have a strong sense of meaning,
Mhm.
maybe that's the reason to put up with it. The meaning could be, again, the paycheck and the roof they put over someone's head and the food that goes on the table and or the sense of meaning or just acceptance of like, this is how it is. But there are people trying to change that in healthcare, but it takes time and trying to turn that ship at General Motors. I'm sure is still that ship is still turning.
Well, there's norms, right? Norms are very deep-seated ways that work gets done, and it's not easy to change norms, but, the more people who are educated why that's not so great,
Yeah,
can make that happen with concerted effort and leadership and vision that those sorts of things are not gonna be tolerated.
yeah, yeah. So, move in a little bit different direction. As you step into a new situation, new organization, coaching somebody at a new organization,
Mhm.
what are some of the cultural indicators that you're looking for? Things that you would want to see, things that you would hope not to see beyond what we've been touching on already in terms of, an organization that is more likely on a path to excellence.
Yeah, so I think those organizations are the ones that are inclusive. I can walk through a plant and tell if I'm on a curated tour or if that's just how things are. I can tell by people look
Right.
me in the eye and they smile at me and, they want to tell me about what they're doing versus keeping their heads down and, cranking out parts in a productive way. So, I think it's about allowing people to celebrate their successes, places that people keep people safe,
Mhm.
and having that as a value that's articulated and lived on over and over again, because that's the most basic form of caring for your
Yeah.
people is all those things. So you can tell when people have a sense of pride in what they're doing. And I don't think you can have that if you're not treated well.
Yeah. Also want to come back and touch on psychological safety. Brought that up and we share a view of the importance of that, feeling safe to speak up. What are some of the everyday leadership behaviors that would most reliably build that sense of psychological safety?
I think that getting to know your people, building that sense of trust, and not overreacting when people bring things to you. I think
Mm,
the reason that I've observed, and maybe this is the reason in healthcare, is that people tend to not be able to control their emotions when they're in a state of depletion,
mm,
time pressure, tired, not time to take care of themselves physically and emotionally. And so I think some people that don't propagate psychological safety are probably not doing that great themselves.
yeah, yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
they get hijacked. by their
Mm,
emotions. So I think the most important thing you can do is if you're feeling as though you want to overreact, just take a pause. Take a
mhm,
pause, get yourself into a situation where you're reframing the situation, not, oh gosh, another problem, but I'm really glad that Bobby brought this to me because we may be able to prevent an accident if we
mhm,
if we do this. So it's just about recognizing, particularly as a leader, that the behaviors that you are coming to work with every day are gonna be emulated throughout the organization, and that's a lot of responsibility. That's a
yeah,
lot of
yeah,
responsibility.
yeah. I mean, what we said there, I think is, really thought provoking about people getting upset, overreacting when they're depleted in some way. I think that's a far more helpful framing. I'll admit to sometimes framing it in my mind of, well, that leader who overreacts and blames individuals for systemic problems, like they're either, in some way, yeah, they're a bad person for lack of a more articulate way of saying it, that they're flawed or they're doing these things intentionally or they're deflecting. But I mean, I think you raise a good reminder to try to be more understanding of some of the systemic factors. I mean, these leaders operate in a system that could be depleting them. They might have unrealistic goals. They're under a lot of pressure.
Mhm.
Man, it's a reminder to myself to be a little more understanding.
Well, I think you can be understanding and compassionate, but still give that level of accountability, right? So
Mm,
if you're seeing, uh say you have leaders who report to you and you're seeing this behavior, you wanna have those conversations with that leader saying, "Look, this is not acceptable behavior. Why are you acting that way?"
mm,
And
mhm,
look for signs of depletion, look for signs of stress and ways that you can work together to mitigate that. And then there are other people who just don't know better. That's how they were raised.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the only experience they have. And so you have to teach them. So I don't, when I say to have compassion and reframe it and understand some of the factors that contribute to it, doesn't mean you have to tolerate it for the long term. You have to,
Mhm,
still hold people accountable
mhm,
to your standards and your values of how you want people treated. And to the extent that you can help them get those skills or get that sense of relief or get that sense of security, you can help change that system. But people will recognize, what we address and what we don't address as leaders, but always trying to just pause and be curious about what you're seeing before rushing to judgment, I think
mhm.
can help a lot.
Yeah.
I used to, I mean, and just even going back to not people exploding, but, I remember I also worked in automotive and we were making pressure sensors and I could not understand for the life of me why we couldn't label the boxes right. And I'm like, what is, I mean, we built these things, they're big technology, we built them right. And then we put the wrong number on the box or the wrong, and I literally couldn't understand it until I went out and worked there in shipping for a day. And I was like,
Mm,
oh my goodness, it's amazing we ever put the right label on these things with the system that we
yeah.
provide for people. So, it's just
Mhm,
having that perspective of trying to understand before we react
yeah.
goes a long way.
Yeah. I mean, that same question of how hard could it be? How you have to be phrased in different tone.
As you could be like, huh, maybe there's something systemically wrong here, or something we
Yeah.
could improve instead of how can it.
How hard can it be? Meaning, what the bleep is wrong with you, as opposed to why might it be so difficult to do it that way? Yeah,
Correct.
yeah, and going out to observe and to see, to listen to
Yes.
people. Yeah.
Yes. And then helping them fix it
Yeah.
was just amazingly satisfying, not only for me, but for them. Like, oh my gosh, someone finally cares about the fact that,
Yeah.
we have 800 customers and every single one has a different requirement that we keep adding on sticky notes and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, none of us is perfect. None of us is always going to react the way that we want to. But if we can embrace these principles, we can really make a difference and make operations, manufacturing, healthcare, a place that's uplifting and again, it's not about coming to work skipping every day, but it also has big implications in performance
Yeah.
in a positive way.
Right.
So if you care about the bottom line, you should care about what you think are maybe soft skills.
Right. And there's correlation and I think quite reasonably causation between, for example, the general level of psychological safety and organizational performance. That, if these concepts sound like a bunch of nicey nice woo woo talk, like, well, no, this is like if you want your organization to improve and innovate and excel,
Yeah.
these things are really a must have. Now, I think the challenge is some organizations succeed to a point without those factors. And then maybe that leads some people to excuse you don't need that to succeed. But there's that kind of unknowable thought experiment of like you would perform even better. Yes. And maybe that's like the positive psychology of going from thriving to thriving even more. Because I think sometimes when an organization is thriving financially, people will make excuses for what might otherwise be deemed bad behavior.
Yeah, but sometimes I agree with you. Sometimes it might be you're in the right marketplace at the right time,
Mm,
and it has literally nothing to do with your culture
mhm.
or your internal systems.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, Dell Computer in the mid to late 90s was an example of that.
Mhm.
Because as I experienced for about 2 years, there were a lot of deficiencies in terms of internal systems and culture. Some of it was acknowledged internally and we got to work on, and some of it was just, hey, that's just the way it is here. Well, it would be better.
That's why all the companies need people like us who always can see the next level and allow a situation where people, when we can't see the next level, bring up their ideas. It just accelerates when you have more people who want it to be better and know that what they bring values and matters and will be implemented if it's feasible.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe is start to wrap up. There's two other questions to cover here. One kind of connecting dots back to positive psychology. How has that education changed the way that you coach leaders?
Oh, it's given me the science behind how I intuitively led.
Mm,
I have lots of studies that tell people about the benefits of optimism that have been studied by scientists. I'm the person who translates this science to what it looks like on concrete. You may read a book and it's like, okay, you get this result if you do X, Y, Z. And I'm like, okay, so that's what it looks like in that book, but on the floor, this is the language it might look like.
right.
Those sorts of things. So,
Right.
for me and I did learn a lot about it and, more is better is, like you said, a combination of my personal stories and experiences, but they relate to research and what research tells us facilitates results.
And then do you find some people want to learn more based on research and evidence versus they want to learn from Kathy and the hard fought experiences? This is what we're
Everybody's different, I think, so more is better offers both. It's like, "Okay, here's what it says, and here's how I learned it," you know? The stories really give me street creds. I'm not a researcher, but I have been very blessed to be able to learn from some of the brightest minds out there in terms of organizational research. So it works for both. I teach classes on this, and some people at the end say, "Oh, I just learned so much from your story about how you handled that." And other people are like, "Hey, I run a lab, so I really appreciate, the statistical correlation between this behavior and this outcome." So it's all there, whichever you like.
Yeah. And encourage people to check out the book. More is better. Well, final question: you spend a lot of time. Some of the coaching you do is coaching women who are navigating male-dominated industries.
Mhm.
What are some of the patterns around what helps women in that situation thrive?
Yeah, so, I have a formula for that because, I am an engineer first, and it's R cubed A. It's relationships, realities, and results and authenticity. So, relationships are very important, making sure that you're cultivating them with people, you're looking for allies, you're being an ally, mentors, relationships with your peers, like the story I told you about the day I got yelled at. Like,
Mhm.
relationships are huge realities of understanding some of the stereotypes that still exist. Maybe, maybe not that we love them. An emotional outburst by a female versus a male is perceived very differently still. So understanding the realities of what you're working with, and then results is the most important thing. And I always say, let results be your calling card.
Yeah.
And then be your authentic self. It's okay. It's okay to display female characteristics, right?
Mhm.
In a male dominated world, it's okay to wear high heels in the office, not on the floor, but just be yourself and get those results. Understand what you're dealing with, and build a solid network around yourself. And that's what I found was a formula for success for me. In retrospect,
Yeah. Sure.
I didn't start with that formula.
Well, it'd be, there's opportunities. I'm sure women who are listening, who are looking to get that kind of coaching, or anybody who is looking to learn from Kathy. You can learn more about how to work with her through her website, and again, look for all of that in the show notes. You mentioned the high heels. Good callback to your book, co-authored with Shannon Carroll, Steel Toes and Stilettos, because very often you wore both types of shoes on the same day,
I
right?
did. Yes, I always had a shoe bag with me, depending on what part of the, building I was in.
Yeah. And the new book, congratulations on the release. More is better, leading operations with meaning, optimism, and relationships for excellence. So thanks for coming back on the podcast, Kathy. It's always great to talk to you. And thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.